The idea came to Elon Musk on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was scrolling through social media when he stumbled upon a post about a homeless man who was turned away from a bank when he tried to open an account with cash he had saved for months. The story stuck with Musk throughout his morning routine. By the time he arrived at his office, a plan was already forming in his mind. What if I could see it for myself? He wondered, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. The city sprawled below him, a place of stark contrast between wealth and poverty that he rarely experienced firsthand from behind the tinted windows of his luxury cars. That afternoon, Musk called a small meeting with his most trusted team members. 5 people gathered in the glass-walled conference room, curious about the unexpected summons. Musk was known for his spontaneous ideas, but something about his expression today seemed different. "I want to try something," he began, pacing slowly around the table. "I want to see how our banking system treats people who don't look like they have money." His assistant looked up from her tablet with raised eyebrows. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I want to disguise myself as a homeless person and try to open a bank account." The room fell silent. His security chief cleared his throat. "With all due respect, sir, that sounds like a security nightmare." "And a PR disaster waiting to happen," added his communications director, already imagining the headlines. But Musk wasn't deterred. He sat down at the head of the table and leaned forward. "Look, we all live in a bubble. We talk about changing the world, about making things better for everyone. But do we really understand what some people go through just to access basic services?" He pulled up the post he had seen earlier and displayed it on the wall screen. This guy had saved up $700. He went to 3 different banks and all of them made it nearly impossible for him to open an account. One bank employee even suggested he clean himself up before coming back. Musk's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "We're working on rockets to Mars and tunnels under cities, but some people can't even get a bank account. How can we talk about a cashless society when banks won't even serve everyone?" His legal advisor, a woman who had been with the company for years, spoke up. "There are privacy laws, discrimination issues we could expose. This could be valuable, but also risky. That's why we need to do it right." Musk replied. "No cameras, following me. No big reveal while I'm in the bank. Just me, experiencing what millions of people face every day." The team spent the next hour discussing logistics. They debated which banks to visit, how thorough the disguise should be, and what story Musk would tell. His security team insisted on having plainclothes personnel nearby, while his PR director wanted to make sure they had a plan for how to use the information afterward. "The goal isn't to shame any specific bank," Musk explained. "It's to understand the problem so we can help fix it." As the meeting wound down, his assistant had one more question. "Are you really sure about this? You're one of the most recognizable people in the world." Musk smiled. "That's what will make it interesting. If they don't recognize me, if they just see another homeless person, that tells us something important, doesn't it?" Over the next few days, Musk dove into research. He read stories from people who had experienced homelessness, studied statistics on banking discrimination, and consulted with nonprofits who worked with unhoused populations. He learned that nearly 25% of U.S. households were unbanked or underbanked, with many citing minimum balance requirements, fees, and feeling unwelcome as reasons they avoided traditional banks. The more he learned, the more determined he became. Week after the initial meeting, Musk gathered his team again. This time he had a more detailed plan. "I've found someone who can help with the disguise," he announced. "She works in film and has done aging and character transformations for some major movies. She can make me unrecognizable." His security chief still looked worried. "And if someone does recognize you?" "Then I'll be honest. I'll say I'm doing research for a project on financial inclusion. But I don't think that will happen." They spent another hour finalizing details. Musk would visit 3 different banks in areas with varying income levels. He would bring $200 in cash and attempt to open a basic checking account. His backstory would be simple. He was a former tech worker who had lost his job during layoffs and eventually his home after depleting his savings. "I want to see if my treatment changes based on the neighborhood," Musk explained. And I want to see if bank policies actually match their practices. 2 days later, Musk arrived at a nondescript office building before dawn. The makeup artist, who had signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, was waiting with her equipment ready. This will take a few hours, she warned him, and it won't be comfortable. I've slept on factory floors during production crunches, Musk replied with a small smile. I think I can handle some makeup. The transformation began. First came the prosthetics, subtle changes to his jawline and nose that altered the fundamental structure of his face. Then layers of makeup to create the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors. His hair was temporarily dyed gray at the temples and styled to look unwashed and unkempt. The makeup artist worked methodically, stepping back occasionally to check her work. The key is making you look ordinary, she explained. Someone people's eyes would just slide past. By mid-morning, the physical transformation was complete. Musk hardly recognized himself in the mirror. His normally alert, intense eyes now looked tired and wary from beneath bushy eyebrows. Lines of worry and exposure to the elements creased his face. His skin had a weathered, slightly ruddy appearance. Now for the clothes, said his assistant, who had arrived with several bags from secondhand stores. The clothing transformation was just as thorough. Layers were key. A stained t-shirt, a flannel shirt with frayed cuffs, a jacket that had once been nice but was now worn at the elbows. Pants that were slightly too big, held up with a belt that had seen better days. Shoes that were sturdy but scuffed beyond repair. When he was fully dressed, Musk moved around the room trying to get comfortable in his new skin. The makeup artist handed him a small mirror. Remember, it's not just how you look, she advised. It's how you carry yourself. Your posture, your confidence, the way you make eye contact, all of it needs to change. Musk nodded, already feeling different. He practiced slumping his shoulders, lowering his gaze, making himself smaller, the opposite of everything he normally did as a CEO, used to commanding attention. His security chief arrived as they were finishing up. He walked right past Musk at first, then did a double take. That's incredible, he admitted. The final touch was a worn backpack containing Musk's few possessions for the day. The $200 in crumpled bills, a water bottle, an old flip phone, nothing that could be traced back to him, and a tattered notebook where he planned to record his observations. Remember, his security chief said as they prepared to leave, we'll have people nearby but not close enough to interfere unless there's a real problem. You need to experience this authentically. Musk nodded, suddenly feeling nervous. He was used to taking risks, business risks, technology risks, even physical risks with some of his company's products. But this was different. For the first time in years, he was about to step into a world where his name and wealth wouldn't shield him. That's the point, he reminded himself silently. That's exactly the point. As he stepped out onto the street, blending immediately into the urban landscape, Musk felt a strange mix of vulnerability and purpose. For the next few hours, he wouldn't be a billionaire, a CEO, or a public figure. He would just be Edward, a man down on his luck trying to access a service most people took for granted. The first bank was 20 minutes away by foot. As Musk walked, practicing his shuffling gait and avoiding eye contact with passers-by, he mentally rehearsed his story one more time. By the time the bank's glass doors came into view, he wasn't Elon Musk at all anymore. He was Edward, and he was about to find out if banks really served everyone equally. The experiment had begun. The glass doors of First Capital Bank gleamed in the morning sunlight. Edward, as Musk was now thinking of himself, hesitated for just a moment before pushing them open. The cool air conditioning hit him immediately, along with the distinct smell of polish and paper that seemed common to all banks. Inside, the space was tastefully decorated with marble floors, potted plants, and a waiting area with leather chairs. A security guard stood near the entrance, his eyes immediately tracking Edward as he stepped in. 3 teller windows were staffed at the front with glass offices visible toward the back, where bank officers sat at their desks. Edward took a deep breath and approached the woman standing at a small podium, who appeared to be directing customers. "Good morning," he said, his voice intentionally softer than Musk's usual confident tone. "I'd like to open an account, please." The woman, her name tag read Linda, looked up and did a quick visual assessment. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes changed slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No, I didn't know I needed one," Edward replied. "We typically recommend appointments for new accounts," she said. "It can be quite a wait otherwise." Edward nodded, trying to appear meek. "That's okay, I can wait." Linda seemed surprised by this response. She glanced around the mostly empty bank. "Well, let me see if anyone might be available. What type of account were you interested in?" "Just a basic checking account. I have some cash I'd like to deposit." He patted the pocket of his worn jacket. "I see. And do you have proper identification with you today?" "Yes, I have my ID," Edward replied, having carefully prepared this part. His team had created a legitimate ID with his disguised photo and the name Edward Miller. Linda hesitated, then pointed to the waiting area. "Please have a seat. It might be a while." Edward thanked her and moved to the leather chairs. He noticed how the security guard's eyes followed him, and how other customers who entered after him were quickly directed to available staff. He pulled out his tattered notebook and pretended to read it while actually jotting down observations. 30 minutes passed. The bank wasn't busy. Several customers had come and gone, including 2 who had also wanted to open accounts and had been immediately helped. Edward remained waiting. Finally, Linda approached him. "Mr. Wilson can see you now," she said, gesturing toward a glass office in the corner. Edward gathered his belongings and followed her. Mr. Wilson was a middle-aged man in a crisp suit who did not stand when Edward entered. He remained focused on his computer screen for several moments before finally looking up. "So you want to open an account," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Edward replied. "A basic checking account. I have $200 I'd like to deposit." Mr. Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly. "Just 200? "It's what I have right now," Edward said. "I'm trying to get back on my feet." "I see." Mr. Wilson's tone made it clear that he did indeed see. He saw someone he didn't think belonged in his bank. "Well, we have minimum balance requirements. For our basic checking account, you need to maintain at least $500 to avoid monthly fees." This wasn't true. Musk had researched this bank thoroughly beforehand. Their website clearly stated that their basic checking account had no minimum balance requirement. "Oh," Edward said, feigning disappointment. "I thought your website said there was no minimum for basic checking." Mr. Wilson's expression tightened. "Our policies change. The website might not be updated." "I see. Well, what would the monthly fee be if I can't keep $500 in the account?" $25. Again, not true. The actual fee was $12. Edward nodded slowly. "That's a lot. But I really need a bank account to try to get back on my feet. To get paid from jobs and such. Have you considered one of those prepaid card services instead?" Mr. Wilson suggested. "They might be more suitable for your situation." Edward leaned forward slightly. "I really want a proper bank account. I used to work in tech before I lost my job. I understand how banking works, and I'd prefer the security of a real bank." Something in his articulate response seemed to surprise Mr. Wilson, who studied Edward more carefully now. "Well, let's see your ID then." Edward produced his wallet, deliberately chosen to be worn but not completely falling apart, and handed over his identification. Mr. Wilson examined it closely, turning it over several times as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This address, is this current?" "No," Edward admitted. "I don't have a permanent address right now. I'm staying at the downtown shelter." Mr. Wilson handed the ID back and sighed. "We need a permanent address for statements and correspondence." "I thought you offered paperless banking," Edward countered. "I can use email." "We still need an address on file." Edward nodded thoughtfully. "I can use the shelter's address. They allow mail service for residents." Mr. Wilson tapped his fingers on the desk, clearly searching for another objection. We'll need to verify your previous banking history. Do you have any references from previous banks? I had an account with United Bank for 15 years before my situation changed, Edward said, naming a competitor. I can provide their information. This back and forth continued for nearly 20 minutes. For every obstacle Mr. Wilson raised, Edward had a reasonable solution. It was becoming increasingly clear that the banker was simply hoping Edward would give up and leave. Finally, after Edward had countered every official requirement, Mr. Wilson leaned back in his chair. Look, he said, dropping some of the professional facade. I'm trying to help you here. Our bank might not be the best fit for someone in your position. We cater to a certain type of client with established finances. The paperwork alone for a new account takes nearly an hour. I'm not sure it's worth your time or ours for just $200. Edward remained calm, though inside Musk was seething. I understand, he said quietly. But everyone needs to start somewhere, right? Your website says you're banking. For all. I just need a chance. Mr. Wilson glanced at his watch. I have another appointment coming up. I'll tell you what, why don't you come back when you have a more substantial amount to deposit and a fixed address? Then we can revisit this conversation. Edward stood slowly, gathering his backpack. Thank you for your time, he said. As he turned to leave, he added, Could I have a brochure with your account information, so I know what to aim for when I come back? Mr. Wilson handed him a glossy brochure, clearly eager to end the interaction. Edward thanked him again and walked out, feeling the eyes of the security guard and Linda on him as he pushed through the glass doors back into the sunlight. Once outside, he walked around the corner to a small coffee shop his team had selected as a meeting point. In the bathroom, he scribbled detailed notes about the interaction while it was fresh in his mind. The fake minimum balance requirement, the inflated monthly fee, the unnecessary obstacles that weren't listed in any official policy. His security chief was waiting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. When Edward sat down across from him, the man barely recognized him despite knowing about the disguise. So, his security chief asked after ensuring no one was within earshot. Exactly what I expected and worse, Edward replied, his voice returning to Musk's natural cadence. They never explicitly refused me service, but they made it nearly impossible. Created fake requirements, suggested I didn't belong there. His security chief nodded. The second bank is across town. Did you want to continue? Musk considered this. Part of him wanted to reveal himself to Mr. Wilson, to see the banker's face when he realized he'd been dismissing one of the richest men in the world. But that wasn't the point of this experiment. Yes, he decided. Let's try the other locations. I want to see if this was just one banker or if it's systematic. They finished their coffee and left separately. His security chief headed directly to the next location to position the team, while Edward took a city bus. Another new experience for Musk, who typically traveled by private vehicle or plane. On the bus, surrounded by everyday people heading to work or errands, Edward had time to reflect. He'd known discrimination existed in banking. The statistics had told him that. But experiencing it firsthand, feeling the subtle disdain, seeing the double standards in action, was different. It was visceral in a way numbers on a page could never be. As the bus rumbled through the city, passing from the wealthy downtown district into a more middle-class neighborhood, Edward prepared himself for the next bank. He adjusted his posture, back to the slightly hunched position he'd practiced, tucked away his notes, and reminded himself of his backstory details. The second bank was just coming into view. It was smaller than the first, with a brick facade instead of glass and steel. Edward wondered if the reception would be any different here, away from the financial district's towers. He straightened his worn jacket as best he could and stepped off the bus, ready for round 2 of his experiment. The morning's experience had only strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about understanding the problem anymore, it was about fixing it. Community Trust Bank looked more welcoming than the first bank. Its brick exterior and smaller size gave it a neighborhood feel rather than the corporate atmosphere of First Capital. Edward stood across the street for a moment, observing people going in and out. A young couple emerged smiling, paperwork in hand. An elderly man with a cane was helped up the 3 steps by a staff member. Maybe this place would be different. Edward crossed the street and climbed the steps to the entrance. Inside, the bank was busy but not crowded. The decor was less fancy, no marble floors or designer furniture, but it was clean and well-maintained. Posters on the walls advertised first-time homebuyer programs and small business loans with smiling, diverse faces. He approached the information desk where a middle-aged woman was directing customers. "Good morning," Edward said with the same soft voice he'd used at the first bank. "I'd like to open a checking account, please." The woman, her name tag read Patricia, looked up and smiled. Unlike Linda from the first bank, her smile reached her eyes. "Of course, do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't," Edward replied, preparing for rejection. "That's not a problem at all," Patricia said cheerfully. "Let me see who's available to help you." She checked her computer screen. "It looks like Tom has an opening. He'll be with you in about 10 minutes. Would you mind filling out this preliminary information while you wait?" She handed him a clipboard with a single-page form. Edward took the clipboard, slightly surprised by the warm reception. "Thank you. There's coffee and water over there if you'd like some," Patricia added, pointing to a small refreshment area in the corner. Edward nodded his thanks and took a seat in the waiting area. He looked down at the form, which asked for basic information: name, contact details, ID number, and what type of account he was interested in. He filled it out carefully, noting that it didn't ask for employment information or a minimum opening. Deposit amount. As promised, about 10 minutes later, a young man approached him. "Mr. Miller, I'm Tom. I'll be helping you today." He extended his hand for a handshake. Edward stood and shook his hand, noticing that Tom didn't hesitate or grimace at his appearance. "Follow me to my desk, and we'll get you set up," Tom said, leading the way to a row of desks in an open area rather than a private office. Once they were seated, Tom looked over the form Edward had filled out. "So you're interested in opening a checking account. May I ask what features are most important to you in a bank account?" Edward hadn't expected this question. Low fees, I guess, and being able to deposit and withdraw easily." Tom nodded. "Makes perfect sense. We have a few options that might work for you." He turned his computer screen so Edward could see it, too. "Our basic checking account has no minimum balance requirement and no monthly fee if you have direct deposit or make at least 10 debit card purchases per month. Otherwise, it's an $8 monthly maintenance fee." This matched what Edward had found in his research about this bank. "That sounds good," Edward said. "I don't have direct deposit right now, but I could use the debit card." "Great," Tom said. "And how much were you looking to deposit today to open the account?" $200, Edward said, watching carefully for Tom's reaction. There was none. Tom simply nodded and made a note. "That's fine. We don't have a minimum opening deposit requirement." Edward decided to test further. "I should mention that I don't have a permanent address right now. I'm staying at the downtown shelter. Is that going to be a problem?" Tom looked up, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "We do need an address on file for regulatory reasons, but the shelter address works if they accept mail for you. We can also set your account up for electronic statements to reduce paper mail." "They do accept mail," Edward confirmed, surprised again by the lack of resistance. "Perfect. Now I'll need to see a valid ID, please." Edward handed over the same ID he'd shown at the first bank. Tom looked at it briefly, checking it against the information on the form, then handed it back without excessive scrutiny. "Thanks. Now let's talk about what comes with this account." Tom proceeded to explain the features: online banking, mobile app, ATM access, and debit card. He showed Edward a sample checkbook and explained how to use it. "Do you have a phone where you can download our mobile app?" Tom asked. "I have a basic phone, not a smartphone," Edward admitted. "That's not a problem. You can still access your account through our website from any computer, like at the public library. And of course, you can always come into any branch for help." The entire process was straightforward and dignified. Tom asked the necessary questions but didn't create arbitrary obstacles. He explained things clearly without being condescending. Most importantly, he treated Edward like any other customer. When they reached the end of the application process, Tom asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" Edward thought for a moment. "How long until I get the debit card?" "It will be mailed to your address in about 7 to 10 business days. In the meantime, you can use temporary checks if you need to access your money, or you can come into any branch with your ID." "And what about the credit check? Will you need to do that?" Edward asked, remembering how the first banker had mentioned this as a potential obstacle. "We don't do credit checks for basic checking accounts," Tom explained. "We do use a banking history reporting system to check for previous issues with bank accounts, but not credit scores." After a few more questions and answers, Tom printed out the account agreement and pushed it across the desk for Edward to sign. "Once you sign these papers, I'll take your deposit, and your account will be active immediately. You'll leave today with your account number and temporary checks." Edward signed the papers and took out the worn envelope containing his $200 in crumpled bills. He felt a twinge of guilt about taking up Tom's time for an account that wouldn't actually be used, but reminded himself that the purpose of this experiment could potentially help thousands of people. Tom counted the money twice, prepared a deposit slip, and handed Edward a folder containing his account information, temporary checks, and bank brochures. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller. Welcome to Community Trust Bank. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, thank you. You've been very helpful." Tom stood and offered his hand again. "If you think of any questions later, don't hesitate to call or come back in. My direct line is written on the card in your folder." Edward left the bank feeling conflicted. He was relieved that not all banks treated potential customers based on appearances, but the stark contrast between his experiences only hours apart troubled him deeply. Same city, same person, same amount of money, completely different treatment. He met his security chief at a small park a block away. "How did it go?" the security chief asked. "Night and day difference," Edward replied, his voice closer to Musk's natural tone now that they were alone. "They treated me like a human being. No fake requirements, no attempts to get rid of me." "Interesting. What do you think made the difference?" Edward considered this. Could be the bank's culture, maybe their training, or just that they're in a more diverse neighborhood and see all kinds of customers. He paused. Or maybe just human. Decency. His security chief nodded. "One more bank to go. It's in the high-end shopping district. Are you sure you want to continue?" "We've already seen both sides of the spectrum." Edward checked his watch. It was early afternoon now. The makeup was holding up well, though he noticed some of the spirit gum holding his facial prosthetics was starting to itch in the warm weather. "Yes, I want to complete the experiment as planned. 3 data points will give us a better picture than 2. They discussed logistics for the final bank visit. This one would be the most challenging. A prestigious financial institution known for catering to wealthy clients. The kind of place where Elon Musk would normally be welcomed with open arms and offered coffee in a real china cup. As they finished their conversation, Edward noticed a man in a business suit walking by give him a wide berth, clutching his briefcase tighter as he passed. It was a small gesture, probably unconscious, but it was another reminder of how differently the world treated people based on appearance alone. Edward adjusted his worn backpack and nodded to his security chief. "Let's go see if money really can talk." They parted ways again, with Edward taking a different bus route toward the upscale part of town. As the scenery outside the windows gradually changed from modest shops to designer boutiques, he mentally prepared himself for what might be the most revealing visit yet. Pinnacle Private Banking stood out even among the luxury shops and restaurants of the city's most exclusive shopping district. The building was a restored historic landmark with gleaming brass doors, a doorman in a tailored uniform, and a discreet sign that simply read Pinnacle in elegant gold lettering. Edward hesitated across the street, watching the comings and goings. Every person entering or exiting wore designer clothes and exuded confidence. Several arrived in luxury cars that were whisked away by valets. This wasn't just a bank, it was a club for the wealthy. He noticed how the doorman greeted each arrival, with a warm smile and often by name. Would that smile disappear when Edward approached? Only one way to find out. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the street. The doorman's expression indeed changed when he spotted Edward. Not to a frown, but to a look of professional neutrality. "Can I help you, sir?" the doorman asked before Edward even reached the steps. "I'd like to speak with someone about opening an account," Edward replied. The doorman hesitated for just a second. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "I see. One moment, please." The doorman spoke quietly into a small microphone on his lapel, then turned back to Edward. "Someone will be with you shortly." Edward expected to be turned away immediately, so even this brief interaction felt like progress compared to his expectations. A minute later, a man in a perfectly tailored suit emerged from the brass doors. He was younger than Edward expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with a polished appearance and an expression that revealed nothing. "Good afternoon. I'm Christopher, the assistant branch manager. How can I assist you today?" His tone was professional, but neither warm nor cold. "I'm interested in opening an account," Edward said. Christopher nodded. "May I ask what type of account you're looking for, and if you were referred to Pinnacle by one of our existing clients?" "A basic checking account." "And no, I wasn't referred by anyone." Something flickered briefly in Christopher's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "I see. Pinnacle specializes in private banking relationships that typically begin at a minimum of $250,000 in deposits or investments. We don't offer basic checking accounts in the traditional sense." Edward had done his research. While Pinnacle did focus on high-net-worth clients, they did offer standard accounts. They just didn't advertise them widely. "I understand you cater to wealthier clients," Edward said, "but I believe banks are required to offer basic services to all customers. Is that correct?" Now Christopher's surprise was more evident. He clearly hadn't expected this level of financial knowledge from someone in worn clothes. "That's technically correct," Christopher admitted. "We do have options available for those who don't meet our preferred client profile. Would you like to come inside to discuss them?" This invitation surprised Edward. He'd half expected to be dismissed on the steps. "Yes, please," he replied. Christopher led him through the brass doors into an interior that resembled a luxury hotel lobby more than a bank. Plush carpeting, artwork on the walls, comfortable seating areas, and not a teller window in sight. Several well-dressed employees looked up as they entered, their expressions carefully neutral but their eyes tracking Edward with obvious curiosity. Instead of taking Edward to a desk in the open area, Christopher led him to a small, private meeting room off the main lobby. The room contained a polished wooden table, 4 chairs, and a subtle Pinnacle logo on one wall. "Please have a seat," Christopher said, gesturing to the chairs. "May I ask your name?" "Edward Miller." "Mr. Miller, while we can discuss account options, I want to be transparent about our fee structure. Our basic accounts carry a monthly maintenance fee of $75 unless you maintain a minimum daily balance of $10,000. Edward nodded, unsurprised by the high fees designed to discourage smaller accounts. "I understand, and what's your minimum opening deposit?" For a basic account, $1,000, that was a lie. Edward had found no such requirement in his research. "That's a lot," Edward remarked. "I only have $200 today." Christopher offered a thin smile. "Then perhaps this isn't the right time for you to open an account with us. I'd be happy to provide some information about our services for when your situation improves." "What about the Community Reinvestment Act?" Edward asked quietly. "Doesn't that require banks to serve the needs of all communities, including low and moderate income neighborhoods?" Christopher's eyebrows rose slightly. Edward had clearly surprised him again. "You seem quite knowledgeable about banking regulations." "Mr. Miller, I used to work in tech before I lost my job," Edward explained, sticking to his backstory. "I did some projects with financial institutions. I understand how banks work." Christopher studied him with new interest. "I see. Well, yes, we do comply with all banking regulations, including the CRA. But we fulfill those obligations primarily through community investment and partnerships with local credit unions, not necessarily through individual accounts that don't align with our business model," So you're saying you don't want my business because I don't have enough money? Edward said bluntly. Christopher shifted in his chair. I wouldn't put it that way. We simply specialize in serving clients with more complex financial needs. And you determine those needs based on how someone looks when they walk in the door? The direct question seemed to catch Christopher off guard. For a moment, his professional veneer cracked. Of course not, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. We assess each potential client based on their financial situation and needs. Edward leaned forward. Then assess mine. I need a basic checking account where I can deposit money safely, access it when needed, and begin rebuilding my financial life. Can Pinnacle provide that, or not? The challenge hung in the air between them. Christopher looked at Edward, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time since they'd met. After a long moment, Christopher's posture changed subtly. Let me check something, he said, standing up. I'll be right back. While Christopher was gone, Edward took the opportunity to jot down notes in his tattered notebook. This third experience was proving the most interesting of all. Not outright rejection like the first bank, nor easy acceptance like the second, but something more complex, a system designed to discourage while maintaining the appearance of compliance. 5 minutes later, Christopher returned with an older woman. Her silver hair was cut in an elegant bob, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to authority. Mr. Miller, this is Mrs. Reynolds, our branch manager. Mrs. Reynolds extended her hand to Edward, who stood to shake it. Christopher has explained your situation, she said, her voice warm but businesslike. Please sit down. Once they were all seated, Mrs. Reynolds continued. I understand you're interested in opening an account with us, but with a smaller initial deposit than we typically work with. That's right, Edward confirmed. May I ask why you've chosen Pinnacle specifically? There are many banks in the city with lower fees and minimum requirements that might better suit your current needs. It was a fair question, and Edward had prepared for it. I believe in planning for the future, not just dealing with the present. I may not have much now, but that won't always be the case. I want a bank that can grow with me. Mrs. Reynolds nodded, thoughtfully. An admirable perspective. However, I must be honest, our services are designed for a particular clientele. While we can open a basic account for you, I'm not sure it would be in your best interest given our fee structure. I appreciate your honesty, Edward said, but shouldn't that be my decision to make? Mrs. Reynolds smiled slightly. Indeed it should. If you're determined to bank with us, we can open a special account with a reduced minimum opening deposit of $100 and a monthly fee of $25, which can be waived with a $5,000 average daily balance. It wasn't the standard offering advertised on their website, but it was better than what Christopher had initially claimed was available. Edward wondered how many people in his position ever got to this point in the conversation. I'd like to open that account, Edward said. What followed was similar to the process at the second bank, though with more paperwork and questions. Mrs. Reynolds took over from Christopher, handling Edward's application personally. She was professional and respectful, if not particularly warm. When they reached the question about his address, Edward again explained his situation with the shelter. I see, Mrs. Reynolds said. That does present some challenges for verification purposes. We'll need an additional form of ID or a utility bill with your name on it. I don't have either of those, Edward admitted. Mrs. Reynolds considered this. In that case, we would need a reference letter from the shelter confirming your residence there, or a letter from a government agency providing services to you. These were reasonable requirements for security purposes, but Edward couldn't help wondering how someone in his fictional situation would navigate these additional hurdles. I can get a letter from the shelter, he said, but it will take a few days. That's fine, Mrs. Reynolds replied. We can start the application process today and finalize it when you return with the documentation. By the end of the meeting, Edward had a better understanding of how Pinnacle operated. They wouldn't outright refuse service to someone like him, but they created enough obstacles and cost to discourage all but the most determined. It was discrimination by design, rather than by direct rejection. As Mrs. Reynolds escorted him back to the lobby, she handed him her business card. "When you have the letter from the shelter, call my direct line to schedule an appointment. No need to go through the front desk again." It was a small kindness, offering him a way to bypass what would likely be an uncomfortable interaction with the doorman and reception staff. "Thank you," Edward said, pocketing the card. "May I ask what you did in tech before your circumstances changed?" Mrs. Reynolds inquired as they approached the front doors. "I was in electric vehicle development and space technology," Edward replied, allowing himself a small smile at the partial truth. Mrs. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Interesting field. The world needs more innovation in those areas." "I couldn't agree more," Edward said as they reached the doors. "Thank you for your time today." As he walked down the steps, past the doorman who now avoided eye contact, Edward felt the weight of the day's experiences. 3 banks, 3 very different approaches, but all revealing aspects of a system that worked well for some and failed others entirely. He had much to think about as he headed to meet his team at the final rendezvous point, and decisions to make about what would happen next. The sun was beginning to set as Edward arrived at the small studio where his transformation had begun that morning. It felt like days rather than hours had passed. His security team was already there, along with the makeup artist and his trusted assistant. "How was the last bank?" his assistant asked as he entered. "Educational," Edward replied, collapsing into a chair. The weight of the day, not just physically, but emotionally, had finally caught up with him. The makeup artist approached with supplies to remove his disguise. "Let's get you back to yourself," she said gently. As she worked, Edward shared details of his final bank visit. His team listened, intently, occasionally asking questions or noting things down. "So to summarize," his security chief said, "the first bank created fake obstacles to get rid of you, the second welcomed you without hesitation, and the third tried to discourage you with fees and requirements, but didn't outright reject you." "That's about right," Edward confirmed as the prosthetics were carefully peeled from his face. Though it was more complex than that. It wasn't just about the policies. It was how I was treated as a human being. At the first bank, I was a nuisance. At the second, I was a customer. At the third, I was a problem to be managed. The removal of the disguise took nearly as long as applying it had. As layers of the character were stripped away, Elon Musk gradually re-emerged. When the last of the makeup was gone, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at him was familiar yet somehow changed. "How do you feel?" his assistant asked, noticing his expression. "Different," Musk admitted. "I've always understood the concept of privilege intellectually, but experiencing its absence even for just a day, it changes your perspective." After changing back into his own clothes, a simple black t-shirt and jeans, Musk gathered his team around a small conference table in the corner of the studio. "What happens next?" his security chief asked. "Do we reveal the experiment to the banks?" Musk shook his head. "No, this wasn't about embarrassing individual banks or creating a PR moment. It was about understanding a system that's failing too many people." "So what will you do with what you've learned?" his assistant pressed. Musk was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "3 things," he finally said. "First, we document everything, every interaction, every fake requirement, every fee discrepancy. We compare that to the bank's stated policies and regulatory requirements." He stood up and began pacing, energy returning to his voice. "Second, we develop solutions. If traditional banks won't serve everyone equally, we need alternatives. That could mean partnering with community banks like the second one I visited, or creating new financial products specifically designed for underserved populations. And third," his security chief prompted, "we use our platform to shine a light on the problem," Musk said. "Not by naming and shaming specific banks, but by sharing the reality of what happens when you don't look like what a bank expects a customer to look like." His assistant was already taking notes. "When do we start?" "Tonight," Musk replied, "while it's still fresh in my mind." 2 weeks later, Musk sat in his office reviewing a detailed report his team had prepared. They had conducted additional research, confirming that his experiences weren't isolated incidents. Studies showed that people experiencing homelessness faced similar barriers at financial institutions across the country. His assistant entered with a tablet in hand. "The first phase is ready to launch whenever you give the word." Musk nodded. "Let's do it." That afternoon, he posted a series of messages on his social media accounts, sharing his experience without identifying the specific banks. "I recently spent a day as a homeless person trying to open a bank account. What I discovered was a system that works perfectly for some and not at all for others," the first post read. He followed with details about the obstacles he encountered, the policies that existed on paper but not in practice, and the profound difference in how he was treated based solely on his appearance. The posts quickly went viral, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of banking discrimination and barriers to financial services. By evening, major news outlets were covering the story. Some questioned his methods, asking whether a billionaire could ever truly understand the experience of homelessness. Others praised him for using his privilege to highlight an often overlooked issue. Musk ignored both the criticism and the praise, focusing instead on the second phase of his plan. 1 month after his day as Edward, Musk stood in a community center in one of the city's underserved neighborhoods. The room was filled with local residents, community organizers, financial experts, and representatives from several banks, including Community Trust, the second bank he had visited. "Thank you all for coming," Musk began. "We're here today to talk about a problem that affects millions of Americans: access to basic financial services." He briefly recounted his experience, emphasizing that it had given him just a glimpse of what many people faced every day. "But I didn't do this just to understand the problem," he continued. "I did it to find solutions, and that's why we're launching the Financial Inclusion Initiative today." A screen behind him displayed the details of the program. Partnership with Community Trust Bank and 5 other community-focused financial institutions to create no-fee, no-minimum checking accounts specifically designed for underserved populations. $50 million in funding to support these programs and cover initial operating costs. A technology platform to simplify the account opening process while maintaining necessary security measures. Training programs for bank staff focused on equitable customer service. Advocacy for regulatory changes to strengthen the Community Reinvestment Act. "This isn't charity," Musk emphasized. "It's about fixing a broken system. Everyone deserves access to safe, affordable financial services regardless of their appearance, address, or account balance." After his presentation, Musk spent hours talking with community members, listening to their experiences and gathering additional insights to refine the program. He met a woman who had been keeping her life savings in cash because she couldn't open a bank account. He spoke with a young man who relied on expensive check cashing services because no bank would work with him. Each story reinforced his commitment to the initiative. As the event wound down, a reporter approached him. "Mr. Musk, many business leaders make donations to causes, but few go to the lengths you did with this experiment. Why was it important for you to experience this firsthand?" Musk considered the question carefully. "Because numbers on a page don't create empathy. Statistics tell you the scale of a problem, but they don't make you feel it. I needed to feel it to understand what needs to change." "And what about the first bank?" the reporter pressed. "The one that created fake requirements to turn you away. Will there be any consequences for them?" "This isn't about punishing individual banks," Musk replied. "It's about changing a system. That said, we've shared our findings with regulatory agencies who have the authority to investigate discriminatory practices." After the reporter left, Musk found himself speaking with the branch manager from Community Trust Bank, the only bank that had treated Edward with dignity from the start. "I never expected to be part of something like this," she admitted. "We've always just tried to serve everyone fairly. It didn't seem special." "That's exactly why it is special," Musk told her. "You did the right thing when you didn't know anyone was watching. That's the definition of integrity." 6 months later, Musk received a report on the Financial Inclusion Initiative's progress. The program had helped over 50,000 previously unbanked or underbanked individuals open accounts, The technology platform was being adopted by additional community banks across the country. Most importantly, regulatory agencies had opened investigations into discriminatory practices at several major financial institutions. He was reviewing these results when his assistant entered his office. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says you'll want to talk to him." Musk looked up, puzzled. "Who is it?" "His name is Thomas. He says he used to live at the downtown shelter but recently got an apartment thanks to a new job in tech support. He wanted to thank you personally for the financial inclusion initiative. He says it changed his life." Musk set the report aside and stood up. "Send him in." As he waited for Thomas to enter, Musk reflected on the journey that had begun with a social media post and a question. Could one of the world's richest men understand what it was like to be turned away because of how he looked? He hadn't fully understood it. One day in someone else's shoes could never provide complete understanding. But it had been enough to spark action, and sometimes that was all it took to start changing the world. The door opened, and Musk stepped forward to greet his visitor, ready to listen to another story, learn another lesson, and find another way to help break down the invisible barriers that divided people based on appearance and circumstance. The experiment was over, but its impact was just beginning.